Life is a long highway and I'm just doing the best I can.
Welcome in to the Straight Line to Success. I'm so excited. I got my guest in here today, Michael Grozier. Michael, welcome in.
Thank you, David. Excited to be here.
Man, it's been cool getting to know you for the last, I guess, about 18 months. You've been in Greenville about 18 months, is that right?
Yeah, probably a little over 2 years,
okay.
actually.
Over 2 years now. Well, it took me too long to meet you. But,
I'm just so glad to be here, and I don't need legal help. That's what I'm so glad to be sitting in your office.
Hey, man, don't be spreading the word. Everybody needs legal help. You know, it's not just for when you're in trouble. Sometimes we can keep you out of trouble. But
there you go.
That's for another show. Again, appreciate you spending some time with our audience here. We're talking about success. We're talking about leadership. And, the sports and entertainment business is one that has fascinated me for my entire life. And, when you're a kid, you kind of get into it and you think that's the fun. That's just fun. If you're getting into sports and entertainment, I mean, it's fun. It's, it's not really that work. It's not that much work. But, you get into it, you realize this is some of the most competitive, if not the most competitive business there is.
Yeah.
And you've been successful in that business for really your whole life. And so excited to talk to you about what you've done through some of the most historic and iconic entertainment venues in history. I mean, holy smokes. And now brought some of that special sauce, if you will, to do something, yourself, pioneering and great vision. You've brought the community together. So let's start by just going back to the beginning. Tell us, about early life. What was early life in Mike Grozier? Family, where'd you grow up?
Sure. Grew up mostly in the Philadelphia, New York, New Jersey area. Went to Villanova University. Ultimately got a degree in communications. Didn't know what I was going to do, though, when I got out. And I think probably like a lot of kids, didn't really even have a clue as to how to enter the workforce. And so, I bounced around a little bit, bartended for a little while. I had a girlfriend at the time. Part of my college career, I had to take some acting classes, and I was always the goofy jock in high school that would, if the English teacher needed somebody for the fight scene in Guys and Dolls, I would go do that.
Okay.
Right? And so, anyway.
And so you grew up, was it Philadelphia, you said?
Yeah, Philadelphia for the most part, and then New Jersey. I graduated high school in Central Jersey, a place called Bernardsville.
Bernardsville.
Yeah.
Okay. And your mom and dad?
My dad was a doctor. My mother was a nurse. They had a classic boy meets girl story. They got married. My mother was actually part of the first nursing classes in the history of Villanova. And so at the time, I only applied really to two schools, Notre Dame and Villanova, and I didn't get into Notre Dame, and I got into Villanova. So that was made
it easy for you.
Made it very easy, yes. And so I got a degree in communications, which included taking some acting classes. So I did some theater. Yeah. And I worked a little bit professionally in Philadelphia, and I was up for Woody on Cheers at one point.
Wow.
But I obviously didn't get it. And, auditioned for some soaps, didn't get them either. But I had a girlfriend at the time who pointed me to the Hard Rock Café. It had just opened in New York City on 57th Street, right over by Carnegie Hall, the original Hard Rock in New York.
Okay. And you were in New York or up there because of school?
Well, no, it was after school. So now
You're living in the city.
I'm living in the city.
Okay. You're trying to break into the acting world.
I'm trying to break into the acting world, but I needed a day job.
Wow.
Or a night job. And it turned out that Hard Rock was the place that I fell into. And that was extraordinary.
Hard Rock Cafe, I mean, this was when it first started.
Yeah. I mean, the first one was in London, and it was 14 years earlier it started.
Okay.
But it took Isaac about 7 years to find his spot in New York. And then it took him some amount of time to develop it and get it open, get the money together. And so I started there about 6 months after, and right about when I started was the beginning of MTV.
And Isaac, tell us about who was that real quick.
Yeah, so Isaac Tigert. Isaac Tigert was part of the Tigert family, was like the patrons of Jackson, Tennessee. His great-grandfather owned a railroad, and his father was the guy that first invented the drinking bird. It's a great story, and it kind of is a fundamental in the whole thing. So one day, John Burton Tigert was in his office, and he kept hearing this tap, tap, tap.
Who is John Burton Tigert?
Isaac's father.
Okay.
And so the Tigerts were a fascinating family. They made they created tremendous wealth, but they never passed it on. It was always sort of stopped, before the next generation. They had to find their own way. So anyway, so John Burton was out there, had a little business, but he kept hearing this tap, tap, tap. And so he said, "What is that confounded tapping?" And so his secretary says, "Oh, it's this mercury thing that goes back and forth, and it's kind of neat." And he was blown away by it. And this is like in the 50s, I think. So anyway, he finally finds the guy who has the patent on it, and he says, "I'd like to buy your patent." And the gentleman is like, "I don't think you could afford it, Mr. Tigert. I want too much money." And so he says, "Well, let's assume I do have the money. How much do you want for it?" And the guy thought about it, and he goes, $10,000, Mr. Tigert. And he writes him a check right away and hands it to him. And then the guy goes, "Well, by the way, though, I only own half the patent. I had a partner." It took him 2 more years to find the other guy. Same story, except this time the guy goes $5,000. And he writes him a check for $10,000, and he goes, "Fair is fair, equal is equal." You know what I mean? And so now he owns it, and he puts the beak on it, and he puts the feathers, and he puts some bird feed at the bottom, and he takes this drinking bird, going back and forth. And these are obviously much simpler times. These kids today get such, magnificent toys.
Sure do.
But anyway, he took out a window on Michigan Avenue in Chicago, and in a CVS. It was like the highest traffic area in the country. Spent a Sunday night, just loading the window up with these birds, and goes to bed at 6 in the morning. And at 7:30, he gets a call, Mr. Tigert, it's a disaster." And so he's worried, is there a fire or what happened?
Yeah.
And he goes, "What is it?" And he goes, "There's a line around the block for these birds. We don't have enough birds." And so he says, "Take give them IOUs, take the money, give them, and we'll get them the birds." And that went on to be like a multi-million-dollar deal in the 50s.
Wow.
Right? And that was the beginning of his fortune. He was also the guy that created the pitchback machine.
Now, is this Isaac or his dad?
That's his dad.
Okay.
That's his dad. So Isaac,
Wow.
He builds a fortune.
Yep.
Great friends with John Paul Getty and all these guys. He ends up in London, and Isaac's folks get a divorce. Isaac goes to London. He's running a bar and a B&B, and he's working in one of his father's factories at this point now, and saving up money. And at some point, he decides he wants to buy his mother a present. So he buys an old Rolls Royce to bring over, and the Rolls Royces in those days were not coveted. They were sort of becoming passé in London. So he buys one, puts it on a boat, lands in New York, and as he gets off the boat, somebody walks up and says, "I'll give you $20,000 for that Rolls Royce." And he's like, "I can't do this. I'm bringing it for my mother. It's a gift to my mother. I saved 3,000 pounds to buy this Rolls Royce to give it to her." And he goes, "My bank's right here. I can give you cash right now." And he's like, "Okay, I'll sell it." And he ended up having like about a two-year window where he's just hustling Rolls Royces across, until the Sunday paper starts to catch on, and all of a sudden that window closes. But he's made a small fortune now, and that's the money he used to start the Hard Rock Café in London.
Wow.
And the Hard Rock in those days, it was catty corner from Buckingham Palace.
Okay.
And it was sort of an affront to the industry. Food in London in those days was terrible, and they weren't known much for culinary. So he opens a Tennessee truck stop with his partner, Peter Morton, who is Arnie Morton's son of Morton Steakhouse.
Okay.
So they open this place. It's just a temple to rock and roll. But all of a sudden, they have lines around the block right away. And inside that restaurant, it would be, little Lord so-and-so sitting next to Jimi Hendrix, who was sitting next to a butcher, who was sitting next to John Lennon, who was sitting next to Mick Jagger, who was sitting next to a banker. Didn't exist. London was such a class-oriented society. This was the first classless restaurant, as he liked to say. And so that was the beginning of the Hard Rock. And then later the memorabilia came along. And that's a great story, too. The memorabilia alone. This was a Tennessee truck stop, right? So it's like Bob's Big Boy. They're selling Rolling Rock and Budweiser in London at the time.
And what was it called at the time?
It was still a Hard Rock Cafe.
Okay, Hard Rock Cafe.
But it wasn't really rock and roll. That was just, they were two 23-year-old guys who were just like fans, right? And part of the anti-establishment. And one day he gets a guitar, and it's Eric Clapton. And Clapton, in those days, if you went around London, you'd find people painting on side of buildings, "Clapton is God,"
Yeah.
And so he puts it up on the wall. And a week later, he gets a guitar case, and he opens it up, and there's this beautiful Fender guitar, and there's a note in there that says, "Mine's as good as his is, Pete Townsend."
Oh, wow.
And that's how the whole memorabilia thing started with Hard Rock.
That's fantastic. So Eric had given him a guitar.
Yes.
He put it on the wall.
Yes.
And Pete Townsend said,
"Mine's as good as his."
Me too.
Me too. Exactly.
Oh, man.
And that's how that all started. So, so when I got to New York, it's becoming, a real rock and roll sort of. It was an iconic part of now rock music.
Yeah.
Right? The Hard Rock Café.
Yeah.
And MTV started shortly thereafter. So, we had the first MTV Awards party where everybody in the industry was there, whether it was Eric Clapton, Tina Turner, Sting, Catherine Bach from Dukes of Hazzard.
Yeah.
At one point she stumbled into my arms, for a 22-year-old kid. That was a really cool moment.
Oh, yeah. I was going to say, how old were you? 22 years old.
22
in
years
New
old.
York, got the tiger by the tail.
Yep, I'm running the front door.
It's the hottest place on the planet.
Yep. It was very, very cool time. Very cool time.
You ran the front door.
Yeah, I had the list of, crossing every. I should have kept that list. Oh my God! Now that I think about it,
Yeah.
that would have been a crazy thing to own.
Yeah.
But and it was an epic party, epic night, and so many amazing things happened.
What's incredible, and I could tell by the way you tell that story about Isaac that this guy, it was more than just a boss to you.
Yes, I think I was always kind of a seeker. I consider myself a spiritual person. I grew up Catholic, and I appreciate all the values that I got.
Yeah.
And so I always thought that there's a way to integrate these things, and I was a team sport guy, so I always liked the idea of working collaboratively with people to create something special. And in those days at the Hard Rock, he had this God wall. In those days, though, the God wall there, he had a humanist horseshoe, said, "Who do you love?" But on the wall was Christianity, was Judaism, there was a Muslim sign, there was a couple other religious signs, but there was also a Quaalude. Do you love drugs? There's a Cougaran for money. There's a bunch of interesting things like that. But it's basically, which God is yours?
He's asking you about your, what your faith is.
Yes, and and he's asking you to ponder all faiths.
Yeah,
right?
in a compelling kind of way.
Yes, exactly. And so, anyway, that became it felt like home to me. And I felt a real kind of belonging there, and that mattered to me. And it was a lot about, you are important as a human being. You work there. You felt that importance of being part of this mission. So to me, it was a little bit of that combination of team sports and theater.
Yeah. Because
theater is a little bit of team sports too. It's just a different way of keeping score, but it's still a collaborative effort. Trying to get an extraordinary result. So.
Oh yeah, sports. Again. You were the oldest of 6 boys, is that?
Yeah, my mother had 6 boys, lost one early, but so 5 of us, grew up together.
Right, and you were the oldest, so I doubt you were beating them down any. Big brothers are always beating up little brothers, right?
We had moments, we did.
But I guess you also got the benefit competing with them. You're talking about sports, so just trying to get some context for the audience. What you played all team sports?
Yeah, I was a football, basketball, baseball guy.
Okay. In what positions?
In those days, I was a 165-pound guard and defensive end.
Okay.
I look at the high school kids now, and the average offensive line's about 270 pounds.
They're monsters.
Monsters, There's only generally 2 guys that size, in any high school team when I grew up. But so I was a 6'2" power forward, became an intramural legend, you know what I mean? But I was a pretty good athlete, pretty good baseball player.
Yeah.
But I was just another guy in that regard.
Well, the sports, as you mentioned, does teach you a lot about leadership. So you get into, and I'm wondering a little bit about why your girlfriend pointed you to the Hard Rock Café. Were they doing something in acting there, or was it just the hottest, coolest place?
Hottest, coolest place. She gave me a list of places. At the time, I think it was. Danceteria and the Limelight and Studio 54, those were all kind of on the list. But for whatever reason, I went into Hard Rock first, and I went in on a Tuesday night at 11 o'clock just to see it. And I was just shocked. The line had just ended on a Tuesday night at 11 o'clock. And so I go in, and I don't really have much money, so I'm a little sheepish, right? And I go up to the bar, and I'm going to ask for some water because I wasn't in a position to buy a drink.
Right.
And the guy said, "Sure, man." Gave me a glass, and I thought, oh my God, this is the only place in New York that didn't grab you by the ankles, turn you upside down to see what came out of your pockets, right? So that to me was really amazing. And then one of the fundamental lessons I got, because I asked, do they take applications for jobs? And so they said, yeah, come back at 11 o'clock tomorrow and ask for Joyce. So I asked for Joyce, and she comes up to me, and I said, I'm interested in the job. I've been a bartender. I've run some liquor stores, and that sort of thing.
Yep.
And the first thing she says to me, she goes, "Are you great?" And for me, kind of as a young Catholic kid, to say I'm great felt like I might be smiting God. You know what I mean? Like, and I pause, and I'm like stumped, because I don't know how to answer that question at 22 years old or 23 years old. And she asked me again, "Are you great?" And I knew that this was my moment, that I have to answer this question. So I looked at her and I said, "I'm great. I am great." And she said, "Okay, come back at 3 o'clock and we'll interview you for a job." And that was the beginning of my career with Hard Rock. But that was certainly a fundamental moment for me, where
life defining,
yeah. Where people were asking you, should they hire you?
Yeah.
And I was uncomfortable saying that, to be honest. But then I realized I better say it. And that was the beginning of my path.
And you went in and went in as a host. Tell us about your, how long were you there in New York? Did you ever work in any of the other Hard Rocks?
Yeah, sure. So I worked my way into management. At the time, we would have lines down 57th Street of people waiting to get in. And I ultimately managed 3 lines, because there was a line to get in, and then there was a line if you've checked in but you have minors, because we wouldn't let people in the bar if they weren't of age.
Yep.
And then we had people waiting to buy merchandise. And so my job was to keep that place full. And so I learned a lot about that too. About business and being organized. So I figured out at the time, we had 180 seats, and we have a bunch of round tables that could seat anywhere from 5 to 8 people. And so, looking at this list and, learning how the tables would turn, and being able to go tell the busboys, okay, we're going to set this for 6 when these people go. We're going to set that one for 7. That'll be a 5 over here, and queuing people up. So by the time that busboy cleared the table and put the last fork down, I was seating people, and then I was reloading the bar again. And so, it was an amazing experience, because sometimes it takes. I'm I pay attention.
Yeah.
And I consider myself fairly astute and pay attention to more things than most people, but I also miss some very obvious things. Like we used to call the bar, the waiting bar, the guitar bar. Well, I thought, it's the Hard Rock Cafe. Of course we'll call it the guitar bar. It took me maybe 4 months that I was there till one day I'm looking down, I go, oh my God, it's a 45-foot Stratocaster guitar. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I just thought it was kind of a cool, funky bar. I didn't realize it was literally a 45-foot guitar.
Yeah.
So but anyway, so I started to learn crazy things, like I couldn't understand why I'd bring people in, and the open spot was always in this dark corner of the bar, and nobody ever wanted to stay there. So it took me a little while to realize that, it's the worst place to be in the building, right? So then I would tell everybody lined up, okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm about to bring you into the busiest restaurant in the world, which we were. We turned every chair in that restaurant 17 times. I mean, most people are thrilled with 4 turns in a day. But we're turning every chair 17 times, and I would start to tell people, okay, I'm going to bring you into this bar. It's the busiest, the coolest place ever, but I'm going to take you to the worst spot in the bar, and you're going to be there for about 10 minutes, and then you're going to get your drink, and then you're going to move, and I'm going to do it again and again. I'd be telling this to the lines inside, outside there, and I'd run them in. I'd get them all fired up, and they'd run into that corner, and I'd say, see, I told you, you know what I mean? Right this way, right around through this crowd. And I go, you happy? And everybody go, yeah, I'm in. And literally 10 minutes later, they were somewhere else, and I'd do it again and again and again. But I realized if it wasn't fun for them, if I didn't make it fun, I mean, who wants to know you're going to the worst spot of the bar if nobody tells you? If somebody tells you it's the worst spot of the bar, then we're being honest.
Yeah.
Right? And then it's your decision where you go from there. I'm telling you where I'm going to put you. I'm telling you what the experience is going to be. And then you decide for yourself what you want to do. And so that was kind of a fun time for me.
Well, you light up. The enthusiasm's incredible, and just the way you tell that story. There's so much detail into, and what really resonates with me is, as a entrepreneur and a business owner myself, is to see all of the detail in those. Hey, we're turning these tables. That translates in my mind to the
money.
Economics, right?
Oh yeah.
The money. So you really understood from some of the best, I guess. Isaac, Tigert sounds like an amazing mentor to have.
Yes.
And so you raised up through the ranks there, obviously extremely astute, detail. It might miss a couple things like, oh, that's actually a guitar. But the stuff that you do pick up, obviously, that's what pays the bills, which is incredible. And paying attention to that dead spot and making something happen and making it cool and fun. Was that something that they, again, the culture there, I think, was successful. You resonated, that they cared about you. It was different than what you'd experienced in New York. I think that you felt like he cared about you. It seems like you care about the other people. Tell me, was that something that you developed, they developed for you, y'all developed together? Was that an intentional creation?
I think it was really a byproduct of something that was inside me, that it needed to be cultivated.
Okay.
It needed to, it was a plant that needed to be watered, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And fertilized. So I think he did that for me. He would talk in our manager meetings about, making, Norman Vincent Peale saying, making money is a byproduct of something you do well. Well, that was interesting to me, so you focus on doing it well and the money will follow. And I think that to a certain degree, that's always been my MO. I didn't really chase money. I chased the work. I chased excellence in the work, and I hope that the money would follow. And I believe the money would follow.
Yeah.
And generally it has, I've had an extraordinary career, extraordinary life. But I know, it wasn't a straight line. You know what I mean? we careened around the on the highway to get where we got.
The straight line of success. Well,
Yes.
but I mean, what did you learn? What is the definition of a straight line?
The shortest distance from one point to another.
So, if somebody's listening right now and, they want to be in the entertainment space, maybe they want to run a restaurant and music venue. Do you think that they could go out by themselves and do it, or they could have your help? Which line's going to be shorter?
Oh, I think with help, it's always faster. But the other thing I tell all young kids that want to get in this kind of industry, get in it. Don't worry about what the job is. You can't climb a ladder till you're on the ladder. You know what I mean? So you may think, this is one rung or two rungs below me. But if you're not on the ladder, you're not going anywhere.
Yeah.
It's the same thing for, if you want to be an entertainer or a musician. You can be the greatest guitar player in your garage, but can you entertain a crowd? Can you respond to crowd energy? Can you feel, or can you drive them, or can you push them someplace? And you only learn that with practice.
And so, you went from New York in the Hard Rock Café. You're picking up these skills. You go to, where was the next
Dallas.
stop? Okay.
So I go to Dallas as a senior manager now. I've already worked my way into management now.
Yep.
I'm the guy that's bringing the New York culture to Dallas, Texas.
And what was that like outside of Deep Ellum? Where was that?
It was outside of Deep Ellum. It was on McKinney Avenue.
Okay.
Which, this was, Isaac bought this old courthouse. So they called it the Supreme Court of Rock and Roll down there.
Man, that's awesome.
And it was very cool. It was a great place, and there was a private club in there called the Cheese Club, which was all sort of salvaged things out of old mansions in London. It was a very cool place. They're doing Bass Ale on tap, and just sort of more English than anything else. So it was exposing people to a different culture, to a different idea.
Yeah. Which again, you're learning from being around some of the best in the industry that developed, I guess in London, which is, one of the epicenters of fashion and trend to some degree. And so you're right there, you're successful in Dallas. And then, that business he built, how many clubs did Isaac built when he ended up transitioning out, correct?
Yeah, he took Hard Rock public.
Okay.
At that point, and then shortly thereafter, he had a child. He married Maureen Starkey, Ringo's ex-wife from the Beatles. So he always said that was his most prized piece of memorabilia, was his wife.
That's a great story there.
It is another great. Oh, so many stories, so many stories. But so he sold to Robert Earl, who then did Hard Rock, sold that, and started Planet Hollywood. And he's, he was another serial entrepreneur.
Yeah.
But he had a totally different sort of thing. Isaac liked to create culture and represent culture, and I think it felt more like Robert was a little different.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get that. Now, but Isaac, so he gets out of the, and did you stick around at that point in time? Or?
Yeah, I stayed for another 6 months or so, but then it was starting to change, and one of the old Hard Rock guys called and asked if I wanted to be the GM of this nightclub they wanted to open in Dallas. So that was my first shot at being a general manager. And I think there's a lot of things in life where there's certain levels that you get to.
Yeah.
Where generally, if you're good, you never go back. You only keep building from there. Another plateau, another plateau. So, to break in and be a general manager of a club, I thought was a great opportunity. I learned a bunch. The club itself didn't ultimately work out. So they transferred. They liked me, but they didn't. The business didn't work.
Right.
And so they transferred me to this place in Piscataway, New Jersey, called Wurlitzer's.
Wow.
And it was like the Studebakers clubs back in the day. They just couldn't get the Studebaker name there, so they called it Wurlitzer's. But we danced on the bars. The waitresses were in cheerleading uniforms. The managers, we all wore khaki pants, blue blazers, and a tie. But we would be part of the dance routines. We get up on the bar, all that kind of stuff, and.
So y'all were part of the entertainment of that place.
We were part of the entertainment. Yeah, we drove the entertainment, us and the DJ. So, it was a very participatory place. We invited people to dance on the bars and all kinds of things, and it was a lot of fun. And
you love that, don't you?
I do. I was the kind of kid that I would work the grill or work the bar when my family had parties.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I'd create menus, or I'd be listing drinks that we're making and things like that. I enjoy entertaining people. I don't need to be on stage. I just enjoy the whole process. I want people to have a great experience.
You don't need to be on stage, but you're comfortable on stage.
Yes, exactly. I don't have the ego that I have to be the guy out in front.
Yeah.
And it's always been very important to me. I learned later on with House of Blues, when we opened the New Orleans House of Blues.
That's what I want to talk about next, but go ahead.
Yeah, I want faces on the business, when we opened New Orleans, and we can jump around, I guess, or whatever you want to do.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about that. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to interrupt your thought, but I feel like you're a great communicator, and so, you're out.
Wow, did you hear that?
Well, communications major. I mean, here he is. He's got that degree on full display for us.
And, thank you.
We appreciate that. But again, these are some iconic things, and as an entrepreneur, as a lawyer of entrepreneurs, as somebody that has been around success and failure, I would say that you've had an opportunity to really be around some really cutting edge successes. It makes sense to me that you'd be a part of some failures in there.
Sure.
Because if you're like me, I think I've learned more from failure than success. But so you're out there, you're grinding, you're getting it, up here in Studebakers, dancing on the tables, entertaining people, and you get a call from Isaac. He's got an idea. Tell us about how that started.
Yeah, so he called and said, I'm starting up this company called House of Blues. It's going to be a blues-based business, but we'll be a restaurant, but I want to do live music. I couldn't wait to work for him again.
Yeah.
That was always still a highlight of my life.
Yeah.
So I took a little bit of a pay cut. I went from being paid $44,000 a year, running this nightclub in New Jersey with, I think it was like a $10,000 bonus potential, but just okay health benefits, for $40,000. A chance to have equity and better health insurance.
Yeah.
So I already had one child at that point. So these are decisions you make, right, in life, and so walked away from a little bit of money short term, but it built a career. And so anyway, so that was again one of those times where I was the first guy in a job too, which is always fascinating.
Yeah.
Because there's no roadmap. There's no if you want to learn how to do this, read this part of the manual. When
it comes to ground floor, you were on it.
On it, and sometimes under it. Felt like.
And y'all started. Where did that one start?
So Harvard Square was the first one. It was a little blue house. It was about 28 feet wide, and we started. We started as a restaurant that did live entertainment. But our opening parties, we did a week's worth of parties. We had the Blues Brothers band there, and at the time. Dan Aykroyd brought in, Paul Schaefer and who else? Like Andrew Strong from the Commitments. I don't know if you remember that movie. It was an Irish movie, about blues, but it was Irish version.
Yeah.
And a bunch of other folks. And then we had a bunch of blues greats, Luther Guitar Jr. Johnson and all these cats. And we did a week's worth of parties. And and then we opened on the Thursday night of Thanksgiving. We didn't open the restaurant. We just opened the music hall, and we sold out. We only held about 225 people, upstairs.
Yeah.
But we had a line around the block, and that next Friday night we opened the full place. And, around 7 o'clock, people start showing up. Who's the show tonight? No show tonight, but we have this great blue clam chowder and blue Bangkok Thai sticks and blue this and blue that. Everything was blue in those days. And people said, oh, that's all right. We'll come back when you have a show. And we were just shocked because it was like hundreds of people. I mean, we had a full restaurant. We were doing fine on the restaurant side, but people were there to hear music. And so literally we got a band the next night, and we had bands ever since. And so we quickly went from being a restaurant company that did live music to an entertainment company that had a restaurant. I mean, that's how fast it evolved, from an entrepreneurial standpoint. And that became really more of our fundamentals. And we were under construction in New Orleans and starting to work on Los Angeles at this point. And so everything changed really quickly then, in terms of what kind of business this was going to be.
Interesting. And y'all raised money for that business, is that right?
Yeah, we raised $36 million of venture capital, and that funded New Orleans, and that funded Los Angeles. And it was supposed to fund Chicago, but we got 2 out of 3.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
But, which is amazing. You're on the ground floor. You started out, wasn't planning on being a music venue. It was going to be a restaurant.
Yeah. Yeah. And Isaac came in at a couple, one day, we're about maybe 3 weeks from opening. He goes, hey, I want to do a gospel brunch. We're like, great. What's that? And he goes, we're going to use our Southern style food, and we're going to find a great gospel talent, and we're going to do a brunch. And so, okay. And so one of the guys, found a host, and, I worked up the floor plans, and the chef, created the menu, and we did our first gospel brunch, and it sold out. And we were so thrilled, at how it kind of went, but we're about 2 hours into it. And I'm looking at the chef going, hey, how long are we supposed to keep this buffet going? I don't know. Well, nobody's eating, and we realized really quickly, we need a closing. You know what I mean? There's a time where this thing needs to end,
Yeah.
Like it just doesn't go on all afternoon with people that's just sitting there, with their gravy hardening on the plate and, their biscuits getting hard.
So what did you do? I mean,
So we realized, okay, next week we're going to have an ending.
Okay.
You know what I mean? And then we're sold out for like 2 months in advance. So, I decided, okay, I'm going to add a second brunch. We'll do this from 10 to 12, and then we'll have a 1 o'clock to 3 o'clock. And that was sold out now, not for 6 weeks, but still like 3 weeks. So I was like, geez, we got to do 3. I mean, the demand is there.
Wow.
We're silly not to do it. And so then we would, get up at 8:30. We'd have a 9:30 brunch, or not, I'd get up at 6, but we'd have like a 9:30, 11 o'clock, and then a 1 o'clock, and we were just hustling. And again, this place is only 28 feet wide. So, me and the maintenance guy, we would spend hours cutting tables, can we shave 2 inches off? Can we make it just a little more comfortable for people? Or how wide does the table have to be with the plates, the flatware, and how we're offering, to feed people? It was really, it was a lot of fun. It was really a lot of fun as an entrepreneur to figure this out. And how do we make it really go?
And so you opened up all of the houses of blues.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah.
And by, you ended up putting in systems and, how to bring, one of the things I think made it successful was just you, and you're paying attention to detail and trying to, maximize all the opportunity for revenues, because really that's how businesses, keep score.
Sure.
And, but, what are some of the other things that you, think are successful or made you guys successful?
I think, we had a heart on the stage, right?
A heart.
A heart.
Okay.
It was it was patterned after ultimately it was patterned after the Sacred Heart. We didn't start that way, but we sort of evolved to that. Alan Aldridge, who did all the early Beatles stuff, and John Lennon called him Her Royal Majesty's illustrator for the Beatles. So he created the Sacred Heart logo, and for House of Blues. So it was similar but different, and but it came to represent kind of what we felt, the piercing of the heart, the thorns around the heart, the eternal flame on the top was all sort of life, and certainly from a blues music perspective, that also rang really true. The authenticity of people creating for the sheer joy of creating, the passion around it, and the pain around it. So that became our logo. There's stories around that too, but I don't know if we have enough time for all this. But anyway, so where am I going with this? So the Sacred Heart.
We're just talking about the success. What made you guys successful?
Yeah, so I think it's the passion and the extra thought into it.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I get frustrated about, even now, you'll see buildings that I know an architect and a designer created it, but the people who are going to live in there's none of their soul in that. And I think for us, we were always willing participants in how do we make this house a home?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? How do we make this matter? Why does it matter? Why should anybody care? Why do we care? And so there's a lot of questions that I feel like you have to answer for yourself.
Yeah.
But when you do that, then it becomes more than a job. Then it's more of a calling. It's a lifestyle. It's a way of making moments matter and making things important that other people might not find important.
Mike, I really appreciate your time and you talking about time. I think we're going to need to wrap this show up, but can you come back for another show?
I'd love to. I feel like we got four. This is only the first of 4 books.
Well, again, I want to. We're gonna stop the show right here, but rest assured, though, we're gonna come right back. We're gonna come right back, and because there's just so much, we're gonna talk about, the House of Blues and continue to make it successful, as well as what your next venture is, and I can't wait to talk about that. And there's just so many things that you've brought to Greenville with you, the attitude that you've brought, success. I can feel it from the way you're talking about the heart. I mean, you really do have heart in what you're doing, and you must be somewhat of a glutton for punishment too, because to continue to create as an entrepreneur, to really. It takes a lot. It takes a special person. So I want to thank you for being here, and I want to thank you for tuning in to The Straight Line to Success. And hey, stick in next show, because we'll be right back with our great friend and leader, Mike Grozier.
Straight Line to Success. Here we go.
Doing the best they can.
Thank you for listening to The Straight Line to Success. Copyright 2026 Wyatt Sports and Entertainment, LLC. All rights reserved. Visit www.tslts.com and join the TSLTS Insider for exclusive content and updates.
And we roll. We're doing the best we can. Everybody do your best. Come on, come on. Do your best. Do your best. The best you can.